All right, so I believe we are recording. There should be something that pops up that asks you to agree to continue staying in the staying on the webinar. But otherwise, we're going to get started. So my name is Ainsley Kelso. I am the communications coordinator at East Tennessee Clean Fuels, as well as for Drive Electric Tennessee. Today, joining us, we have a couple speakers, Joe Ozegovich and JP White, as well as we have a couple other members of the Drive Electric Tennessee, East Tennessee Clean Fuels team, Daniel 6A and Maddie Collins, who will be moderating our chat, as well as, you know, looking for if someone unmutes themselves and we have some sound or something like that, they'll be kind of monitoring those things. And then Savannah Robertson, who is the Drive Electric Tennessee coordinator, who will be joining us and also speaking a little bit. Savannah is also a great person to reach out to if you ever have any questions about Drive Electric Tennessee or anything else electric vehicle wise. All right, so, well, let me go back. So what you've all joined us here today is our EV Mythbusters series, the second in the series, a webinar called Testing Electric Vehicle Range Across Tennessee. This webinar is put together as a part of a larger project with Drive Electric Alabama and Drive Electric Georgia. These are our individual Tennessee webinars, but here in the coming weeks, we're actually going to have some other joint webinars with Alabama and sorry, it appears I was muted. So we will have some other webinars coming up here in the future that you can watch the Drive Electric Tennessee social media for, as well as check our website for registration for those. They're going to be just as informative as the Tennessee specific ones, except they're going to talk a little bit more about, driving between our 3 states and some other great EV range and model and types and things like that topic. So it's going to be a great time, and that's where this webinar series started. So before we get started, one thing we always like to do with Drive Electric Tennessee is thank our members. We have some fantastic organizations as well as individual people that help keep Drive Electric Tennessee moving and keep us doing the work that we're doing. So these are just these are our organizational members right here, but we also want to thank our individual members as well as our executive committee. And of course, everyone here in the office that keeps Drive Electric Tennessee running on the day-to-day and helps put together great events like this. So as the webinar title suggests, we are going to talk a little bit about electric vehicle range. So this is, of course, assuming that everybody knows about electric vehicles, what they look like, what they are. And so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the topic of how far can you go in an electric vehicle? What's realistic, what's not? Answering the question, can you actually take a long trip in an EV, which is one of the questions that we get asked the most and why it's a myth we want to bust today for you guys. So I just wanted to first show a list of some of the 2021, 2022 electric vehicle models that have been put out and the range that is being, shared both by manufacturers and by people that have actually driven the vehicles. I believe I pulled this information from cars.com. They had a really nice article that had a list of all these great ranges and information about the different vehicles and kind of their pros and cons, but I wanted to pull out the range specifically. There, of course, is a narrative around electric vehicles that they can only go 30 miles, 80 miles. You can't get very far. They're commuter cars only, or they are city cars only. And one thing we definitely want to point out today is that that is not true. While a lot of people in cities and while a lot of people that use them as commuter cars enjoy that aspect of them, you absolutely can go further than you think. And I believe our 2 speakers today are really going to highlight that fact that you can go much further than you think. Even in kind of the lowest range for the 2021 Honda Ioniq, that's 170 miles. I can get pretty far on 170 miles. I don't know about you. All the way up to, now this is of course a very, very far range, but down at the bottom there, the Lucid Air Dream, that is 520 miles. Your average EV is not going to get a range of 520 miles. We're not quite there yet, but generally EVs are getting 200, 250 miles, and then you take into account factors such as the age of the vehicle and the temperature that you're driving it in. But generally, you're going to be able to get pretty far if you want to use the full range of an EV. And most people are not doing those long distance drives frequently. But we're here to show you today that it is actually possible to do those long distance drives when you want to do them. Also, before we get too far into the range of EVs, we wanted to just give you a little bit of information for those who may not know about EV charging, as well as some EV infrastructure in Tennessee, because those two things, of course, go hand in hand with talking about range. The next thing people want to ask is, where can I charge? How can I charge? What kind of charging is there? So very quickly, I just wanted to go over the three different kinds of charging that we will be referencing today. The first one being a level 1 charging station. Now this you're not going to find out in public when you're driving around, not frequently. This is going to be a lot of times what people will use at home or something in that nature. It's going to charge the slowest, but it's a great option for people who are charging overnight, people who are able to charge a little more slowly and still get all the benefits of being able to drive an EV. When you get into your level 2 and level 3 charging stations, that's where the ones you're going to start seeing more in public. Level 2, you're going to see a lot of destination chargers, such as in Tennessee, all of our state parks. They're in the process of implementing some level 2 charging stations so that you can take your EV to the park and charge up while you're out on a hike. And then when you're ready to go, the car is ready to drive. Level 2 is going to be kind of that mid-range charging. It's going to be faster than a level 1, and it can usually get people where they want to go, but it's going to generally be slower than a DC fast charger. A lot of people also have level 2 chargers installed in their homes, and I think that is a great option for people. Once again, a lot of people will use it to charge overnight. Usually doesn't even take all night to do the charging for a lot of electric vehicles. And you can also get level 2 installed for a pretty generous price, for a decent price. They're usually not too expensive depending on the brand and things you get. So that's something we always talk a lot about with our EV drivers, and it's a great option. And the last one is DC fast chargers. This is what you're generally going to see out when you're driving around. They're usually a little bit bigger, a little easier to spot. Tesla Superchargers are also like a fast charging station. So a lot of these big ones that you're going to see, that kind of these big machines or big boxes, you're going to say, oh, that's a fast charger. That's the one that charges a little bit quicker, depending on your car type and how much battery and how much charging power your battery can take. These are also a lot of the ones that sometimes they're networked, so they can either charge you to pay, or sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're free. That really also just depends. These are not the kind of things you get installed in your home. I guess if you wanted to, you could. But these are the kind of things that we're going to see out in public. And most of what we're talking about today, when we talk about EV infrastructure and charging in public, we're going to be talking about DC fast chargers. So that's a good distinction to make based on the conversation today. We're not generally going to be talking about level 2 charging. However, that is something that is included. And I believe Joe will point out also charging at home. I believe Joe has a level 2 charger installed. So quickly, I'm going to let Savannah Robertson, who, as I mentioned before, is the Drive Electric Tennessee coordinator and does a fantastic job with all things EVs, is going to talk a little bit about the current and future of EV infrastructure in Tennessee. Savannah?
Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. So first of all, thanks for having me. So on the slide here, you'll see that there's two different maps. The one on the top left is where you can find DC fast chargers across the state of Tennessee. So that's that last charging system that Ainsley had mentioned. And then the bottom right shows a level 2 and DC fast chargers. So one thing that we're trying to tackle right now is to kind of cover those gaps and help relieve some of that range anxiety that many people in Tennessee feel as they're driving along primary and secondary corridors. When Ainsley does send this slide, the presentation out, on this slide is a link to the U.S. Department of Energy's a fuel station locator tool. This is an agnostic tool that shows all EV charging stations. Some of the other websites, they'll show some of their favorite charging stations, whereas this one kind of covers them all. So if you're ever curious about, what's most up to date, that is the tool to use, or at least that's what we use here internally. So figured I'd throw that in there for you. Next slide, please. So as I said, we're trying to close in the gaps. We are working very closely with TVA and TDEC. So TVA and TDEC released a combined $12 million to go solely towards charging structures for local power companies to install in gaps along primary and secondary corridors. TDOT is also in the process of working with us. We are developing a gap site prioritization tool that will allow them, TDOT, to rank applicants once the anticipated 7 million of funding becomes available. So basically what we're doing is we're helping them to rank applicants as they come in and apply for funding to install various charging stations. So, and on the left side, you'll see that there is a map that shows where the DC fast chargers are, again, across the state of Tennessee. And then you'll also see where the gaps are located. So where those dark lines are, that is considered a gap. And with that, so basically how the gaps are identified is we follow the Federal Highway Administration's definition. The illustrations that are there on the bottom left. So these are kind of the phases that Federal Highway has gone through for the requirements of what you can actually do to fill a gap. So initially they rolled out with, a charging station can have a minimum of 50 kilowatts to provide to people that are charging. And then you'll see as you move from left to right, they're slowly upping those requirements. So they went from 50 kilowatts to 120. And then just recently, in the last month, they are now requiring 150 kilowatts. So you're going to see an improvement on the amount of time that you're spending at these charging stations. And then you're also going to see that there's a distance that is decreased. So they at first required that you had to have a charging station within 5 miles from a major highway. Well, now they're requiring 1 mile. So they're getting it a little bit closer to those primary and secondary corridors. But, if you ever want to play around with this map, this is a really unique tool that TDEC generated. So down at the bottom of the slide on the bottom right is a link to that map should you ever want to check it out. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Savannah. Just in case anybody missed that, what Savannah is saying is that, we recognize that, especially with DC fast chargers, which is what a lot of people use when they're traveling, that the gaps are not closed and they are present, and there are quite a few of them. Right now, you can take good trips across Tennessee with what is currently available. But as an organization, we are working with other entities and we are encouraging other entities to continue filling in these gaps. And we hope in the next couple of years to really see an improvement on this corridor map and seeing a lot of these gaps filled in, a lot more charging stations. So people are super excited about driving all across Tennessee in their electric vehicle. Also, just as Savannah mentioned, I'll just make a note of it. We are going to be sharing this webinar along with the video, the links, the slideshow, as well as a fantastic video that Joe Ozegovich created, all to the Drive Electric Tennessee website, as well as social media accounts when this is over. Most likely it'll go up tomorrow. So stay tuned for that as well. So one of the other big topics I wanted to hit before we let our speakers tell us about their personal stories is that a lot of people ask, well, they get confused about, well, how am I supposed to know where these charging stations are? What am I supposed to do about this? It's not like where there's a gas station where I can pull off on any interstate and there'll be a gas station to fill up my ICE vehicle. And that's a great point. That is something we want to talk about. So just like with any trip, when you're going somewhere, there's usually some planning involved, whether that be planning what hotel you're going to stay in, maybe planning where you're going to stop and stay overnight on your way or stop to eat. When you drive an EV and you're taking these long distance trips, one thing you can do along with all your other planning is also plan where you're going to stop to charge. And we've got some great examples of that, but it's very easy to look up where the charging stations are and really put in your route where you want to go, and it will show you exactly where you can stop along the way to make it simple, easy to do, quick to do. And as I pointed out up top, many EVs come with systems built in. I know that Joe is going to mention that Tesla has a system built in. I believe maybe even for JP, the ID4 may have a built-in system. A lot of EVs have already built in that you can just put in where you want to go, just like you would with any other map system. And it'll both give you directions, get you where you want to go, but also show you where along your route you can pull off to stop and charge your vehicle for 10, 20 minutes. It's one of those things where it's quick, it's easy, and it's just one little thing you add into the planning for your travel. There's also, other than just built-in systems that an EV might have, there is a long, long list of tools that EV drivers can use to plan routes. A lot of the ones that I've listed are, ones that a lot of people know about. There's PlugShare, EVgo. Electrify America actually has a DC fast charge corridor completeness map that's just kind of an interesting tool to check out online. I think it's just something you can kind of look at and see, well, maybe where feasibly could I go around the United States? Charge Hub is another great option. And a lot of EVSE that are going to be those EV charging stations, they have some company specific apps as well where you can pay and you can do all that great stuff as well right through their app. This is by no means an exhaustive list of the tools that you can use. There are websites, there are apps, there are a million different things that you can find, as well as you can just ask. You can ask your fellow EV owners. We have the Drive Electric Tennessee Facebook group, which we're going to talk about here in a second. And that's another great place to ask, hey, what's the charging situation look like in X area of Tennessee? Or a lot of people will even post about if a charging station is down, if it's been damaged, or if it's under repair. And that's another great way to hear from EV owners and get that quick access that you may not even get with things like these apps. So all great options and all easy, quick ways to plan your travel. It does not have to be extra complicated. It doesn't have to be a bunch of other steps you have to take. And you definitely don't have to stress about it while you're on the road. You can do this in advance and have it ready on your phone or have your car take you right to it. So now we want to get a little bit more into personal stories. And that is why we brought on some fantastic speakers today. You can hear me and the other Drive Electric Tennessee team members talk all day long about how fantastic and easy this is. But we want you to hear from Tennessee EV drivers and hear their stories. One thing we did do before the webinar is we put out a call in our DET Facebook group, as I mentioned, and just asked people, didn't even mention it was for a webinar, and just asked, have you ever taken a long distance trip in your EV? And we got all kinds of fantastic answers. These are just 6 of maybe 30 answers we got in that group about how far people have driven, what vehicles they drove in, what year they did it. And we had everything from BMWs to Teslas, Mustang Mach-E's, a lot of Bolts. A lot of people have taken some trips in Bolts, as well as Nissan Leafs. So this is also kind of an example, a way to show you that you don't have to just have X vehicle to go far. You can take trips in any vehicle with a little bit of planning and a good understanding of what you're driving and where you want to go. You can do this. Anyone can do this. And so this is just kind of a general encouragement and also a really interesting thing we pulled from our EV Facebook group members. I mean, some people went as far as 5,000, close to 5,000 miles on a trip. It's really, really fantastic stuff. So now we're going to get into our personal presentations and let our speakers today tell us all about the trips they've taken both in the past as well as the trips they took specifically for this webinar. We have some 2 really fantastic speakers. Please just hold all questions until the end of both of their speaking, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we will get to them as soon as Joe and JP have finished their presentations. Joe, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Joe Zegovich. I am an EV owner for the last 10 years. This is my 2nd electric vehicle and I have not looked back. I started an interest in EVs when I was in California. There was an EV1 project and I tried to get involved in it, but I didn't have the capability of charging at my condo, so I wasn't able to get into it. But since then, I've been active. I've saved over $16,000 in energy costs. That assumes I have paid for that $16,000. A lot of this energy is free. I do have solar on my home, so I wanted to make sure that when I got an electric car that I would put my money where my mouth is and make sure it was a clean source. I am a TVA provider, so I actually sell the energy credits to TVA. But in my mind, creating enough energy that would offset in the electrical car usage was important to me. And that was done with my parents when they passed away. That's their legacy. So instead of having a tombstone, my solar panels are their legacy. So I've been driving electric since 2012, and in 2014, I got my Tesla Model S with a range of 265 miles. First thing I did was my buddy Louis Patrick and we went from Memphis to New York, and we utilized a Supercharger network, which is a Tesla proprietary network, and we also used other level 2 chargers along the way. It was to prove that an electric car could actually go long distances. And then 2 years later, Lewis and I went on a trip from Memphis to Canada and back to again disprove the myth that electric car can not only go long distances, but can leave the country. So it wasn't something that you would be encapsulated into the United States with. So we went and did Nikola Tesla pilgrimages to, of course, Niagara Falls and to Wardenclyffe in Long Island as a way to shore up his name. The amount of time to go and come back is really not that much different between an electric car and an internal combustion engine. There is a little bit of additional time, but it's not that much at all. Now for this trip from Memphis to Atlanta, I went via Tennessee. So I wanted to stop at all the Tennessee Superchargers, and it was 945 miles round trip. Only used superchargers, which were free to me. As an early adopter with Tesla, I have got free supercharging, so it didn't cost me a penny. Again, this is, it's been a great advantage to me for going electric. Now, about the 4 stops that I made, I roughly spent about 20 to 25 minutes at each one of those locations. So it really wasn't that much of an issue. And the important thing to remember is this: I got to use the restroom about every 2 hours. I don't know about everybody else, but for me, I got to do that. So I got to that's an opportunity to charge. So when I have to use the restroom, tie it into a supercharger. And when I come back, the 120 miles that I just commuted is just been supplied, and I can just disconnect and go to the next supercharger about 2 hours away. And I can choose. I don't need to stop at every supercharger. I have choices in the state of Tennessee. The network is growing rapidly, and you have choices. So I choose about 2 hours of driving, and that's about 120 miles roughly, and use the restroom. I come back and I'm ready to go to the next stop. So it really doesn't add anything to the trip. So Americans, or we, as a society, we buy for our worst case scenario instead of our best case example. So if you're going to commute, 40 miles a day, this is a no-brainer. If you're a salesperson, you drive maybe 300-400 miles a day on average, then obviously this is not the right car at this particular point. But in the future, that will change. All right, so these are the stops that I was physically stopping at: Jackson, Dixon, Manchester, Adairsville, Georgia, and then finally the destination. And if you were to have to pay for a Tesla Supercharger, I've got this image here, probably it's about 5 years old, from the Tesla website, and it would cost about $9.60 to cover a charge up, and that would probably be like 20 to 80%. So from 20% to 80% would probably be about $9.60. And compared to a gasoline, and this is gasoline based upon, I forget what the numbers were, about $3 a gallon or so on average. And as you could see, it's $14.18, the equivalent in a gasoline car. So you could see the savings there just in the energy. Then you have savings in terms of efficiency of the vehicle. All right, did we skip a slide? I don't know if I went out of sequence there.
Yeah, Joe, before you move forward, I would actually love if you would tell us a little bit about the regenerative braking experience you had along your route.
Okay, this is a wonderful feature about electric vehicles that internal combustion engine vehicles don't have. One is regenerative braking, and that means you can use your single pedal operation. So you can use the accelerator for acceleration and deceleration. And in this particular case, in this image, you see a dip. That's where I'm going uphill. So when it goes down, it's actually going uphill. And then when I'm going downhill, you see the green line going up. I actually increased the amount of state of charge from 64% to 66% by going downhill, just by regulating my accelerator pedal to regen. So the motor turns into a generator. This is the beauty of an electric car. The motor can turn into a generator and actually charge your battery up and slow the vehicle down. So when you're coming down a steep decline, you obviously would hit the mechanical brake on a regular car, which is, that heat energy is lost. And in a electric vehicle, you're actually turning that heat into power that's going to be used for charging your batteries. So I actually increased the rate of charge for my batteries during that time period. Where in an internal combustion engine vehicle, the best case scenario is that you would be at idle power, you would consume gasoline at idle conditions, and you would save energy because you're at idle as opposed to accelerating. But on an electric car, you gain in that particular case. So that's a wonderful feature. It improves the safety of the vehicle as well. So if you're driving around town, not only do you have regenerative braking slowing the car down, but you also have mechanical brakes like a conventional car. And that decreases the amount of distance for your stopping substantially. So an electric car is even safer in terms of regenerative braking. All right, this is just an overview of the entire route. I started in Memphis at my home and went to my girlfriend's house in the east side of Atlanta. And you can see that the route that I took here is the same route I would take if I was driving through Tennessee. I didn't have to alter my route for the EV, for the electric vehicle. All right, so the only thing I did was alter my route so that I would drive through the state of Tennessee. Since I am a native to Tennessee, I live in Tennessee. I wanted to make sure that I drove through the state of Tennessee for this event. So as you can see, no problems at all, no alternative routing based upon an EV charger. These chargers have facilities for restrooms, and you can eat, you can dine, you can do anything you want. It gives you flexibility. So it's a good experience. It's not a negative experience. And planning, you ready for this? I simply start off by hitting the voice command, select the voice command button and say, navigate to Atlanta, and boom, all my charging stations, all the timing that I need for each one of those locations is already mapped out for you. You don't have to think about it. It's not a complicated issue. You may choose not to go to the charger that they plot out for you. You can select another charger. So if I need to make a break for some reason at a different location, I can alter that as well. But if I just want to get a quick overview, I just select the voice command and say navigate to, and plots it out real fast for me. Now this is showing the Tesla Supercharger Map. This is just a couple days old. And as you can see, all your major interstates are fortified. Anything that's red is an existing supercharger. Anything that's blue is a permit. And anything with the construction cone means it's under construction. So you can see you can see where the future is for these Tesla superchargers. These are proprietary, but Tesla has made the effort now to move towards opening it up to a non-proprietary network. So in the future, Tesla superchargers will be opened up to other vehicles as well. And then, of course, as was well illustrated before, here's a map showing all the different chargers, not just Teslas, but other non-proprietary networked superchargers or level 3, DC fast chargers. And this is just DC fast charging. So as you can see, you're not going to have a problem. Now, this is my trip that I took to New York, and this is before the supercharger network was matured. So I went through the state of Tennessee, and I utilized level 2 chargers. My buddy Lewis was with me. We went to South Carolina. We went to Charleston, where I have some family. I visited with my aunts there. And then we went up I-95 and we utilized the supercharger network there. We visited Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, and then we went up north into Long Island, where my family's from, where I grew up, and returned a different route. We followed the most direct route, which would be Interstate 81 and then Interstate 40 back to Memphis. So the route coming back was different than what we used going to, simply because I wanted to visit family in Charleston. And then here's my trip to Canada. We went up on the left route. We went up through Detroit and went through the Ambassador Bridge, and then connected through Canada to Toronto, stayed a little bit in Toronto, and then went on to Niagara Falls on the Canadian side. and then over to the New York side in Buffalo. Went through the state of New York down to Long Island, and then came through interstate, that would be Interstate 81 through Virginia, then into 40, and returned back to Memphis. So there was nothing that I had to vary in 2016 with this route at all for going to my destination and returning. And that's what, 2,700 miles. So that was a long distance road trip, and charging was not a problem.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, for telling us a little bit about both the trip you took for this webinar, and we're really thankful you did that, as well as the 2 other really long distance trips you took in your Tesla. You know, and just in case anybody missed it, you can go far in an EV, and it's not just Teslas. JP's about to tell us about a trip he took in his ID4, which is Volkswagen. People take trips like this all the time in all kinds of electric vehicles. And so I wanted Joe to kind of tell us a little bit about these really, really long distance trips, as well as the one to Atlanta that he took for this webinar. And I think, if anything, that really illustrates how possible this is. On this slide, and it looks like it didn't pull up, but there's actually, so Joe actually videoed and documented his trip to Atlanta. It's a fantastic video. It's about 16, 17 minutes long. When I share the slideshow and everything on the Drive Electricity website, I'm definitely going to share his video. It's a fantastic way to kind of see the car and see the charging process. So please check that out whenever we share all of this. It's another great tool to learn. Oh, well, and there it is. All right, so thank you again, Joe. And now we're going to have JP White present for us. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ainsley. Do you mind going to the picture of the vehicles first?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yep. So yeah, I'm JP White, as Ainsley said, and introduce you to our vehicle fleet, our electric vehicle fleet here. Like Joe, I've been driving electric vehicles for a long time. I bought my first electric vehicle in 2011. That was a Nissan Leaf, one of the very first ones. It's serial number 5,700 and some change. So it's one of the very early ones. And we enjoyed driving that car. As Joe said, they're a good money saver. My interest in electric vehicles was both as a technologist, working computers. So technology is one of the draws to these vehicles. And also, I'm very frugal, and my wife will tell you I squeak when I walk. And I figured out that that Leaf would save me a lot of money. And in fact, I've calculated over the 140,000 miles we've driven in that vehicle, we've saved $14,000 versus driving a previous gas car. So they're a little bit more expensive up front, but they'll save you a heck of a lot on the back end. The second electric vehicle we purchased was the Tesla you see in the front there, that we bought there in 2018. And that was in the first year of manufacture of that vehicle. And we did take a trip to Chattanooga in that recently. But today we're going to talk about a more regional trip we took. And then the vehicle in the middle there is the VW ID4. We got that just last September in 2021. And so that's our vehicle fleet. So we were planning to go visit family. They're out in Dixon, just beyond Dixon, 71 miles in each direction. So I had a choice, which electric vehicle would I take? So let's quickly run through why we chose the ID4 over the other two. So the 2011 Leaf has a rated range of 73 miles, and the trip is 71. So as you can see, it would require some recharges. In fact, there are some charging stations on the way. We could take the 2011 Leaf. We could charge it up at a MAPCO station just west of Nashville there, and charge it at my son's house and charge it on the way back again. But that's a lot of charging just for a regional trip. When we got the Tesla in 2018, we would make that trip in our Tesla versus a gas car. Much better journey. But this year we have now having the ID4. That was an extra choice. So with the Tesla, if you want to go on a really long trip like Joe has done, of those three vehicles, I would choose a Tesla every time. As you explained, the number of charging stations, the reliability of them, and the way it's built into the navigation system, it's the only game in town for long trips. When you're talking a regional trip, like I said, even the 2011 Leaf can do the trip, but which one is what I prefer? The Model 3 on paper looks like it's a better choice because we got 2 superchargers directly on the route on their way out there, one in Dixon and one just west of Nashville at Charlotte Avenue. So, and in terms of Electrify America stations on this particular route, there's none. So I would have to drive there and drive back. The only fast charging station available anywhere close to the route is actually at Titan Stadium there. And if they're playing on Sunday, I probably wouldn't be able to get near it. So you'd think I would choose a Tesla, but in fact we chose the ID4. And the reason for that is we took this journey in February, and February is pothole season in Tennessee. And the ID4 is a crossover SUV. And the suspension is much more compliant. It takes the bumps in the road so much better than the Tesla. Tesla has quite a firm suspension. It's very sporty. And if that's what you like, that's great. But it's much more comfortable. And also, the back seats, when we've got family in the back of the Tesla, I would classify the back seats as tight. They're comfortable, but they're a tight fit. I tend to ride with my seat back a little bit, backward position. Doesn't give my passenger in the back very much room for their legs. So the ID4 has got a lot more room in the back for passengers. So that's much better. Plus it's got massaging seats as well, which is nice. So we decided to take that car instead. So as you can see from the stats, it's a 142-mile trip. And the journey out there to my son's house, it took about 1/3 of the charge to go there. And it took about 1/3 the charge to come back, and cost us about $5 to do that in the electricity charging at home. The total drive time is about 2.5 hours to use 2/3 of the battery. So if I was to use the whole battery, it would take me about 3 3/4 hours to empty it. So it shows you electric vehicles can go a long way. And this is on interstate, driving at interstate speeds. And on the way back, we're actually driving them maybe a little bit above the interstate limit. In quite cold temperatures, 40 degrees. So very cool day. So I put on there that the all-wheel drive version of the ID4 has got a 240-mile range according to EPA. And by my calculations on this particular day, we could have gone about 218. The cold temperatures and driving on interstates does reduce the total range of the vehicle some, but not by as much as maybe people will try and tell you. I wasn't hanging around, so it really did a great job. If you can move on to the map, yeah. So Joe talked a little bit about his range estimator in the Tesla. The ID4 does have a range estimator, and one thing I discovered about it is that it's actually pretty accurate. In the Leaf, it was wildly inaccurate, I would say, is fair to say. It was very optimistic. The ID4 is pretty much spot on, and I find it actually easier to use than the one in the Tesla. There is a screen in the Tesla where you can actually get a fairly accurate representation of how far you've got to go before you empty. But the ID4, it's just right there in front of you all the time. You don't have to press a button or click on a screen. So it's actually, in that respect, easy to use. Now, of course, this trip we're very familiar with, going to see my son, but if we were to plan it using the vehicle's navigation system, the navigation system in ID4 is okay, but it's not fantastic. I actually would use Google Maps in an Android phone. The vehicle does have Android Auto and also has Apple CarPlay. So my preference would be to use my phone as my navigation tool rather than the built-in navigation tool for this particular vehicle. On the Tesla, it would be the reverse. I would use the in-car navigation for navigating. Thank you. So a couple of pictures here of the screen on the left is before we left, and the screen on the right is after we returned home. Just want to talk a little bit about those. So typically we charge the ID4 up to 80% state of charge, which is the recommended amount to prolong the life of the battery. No, we were going to take a longer trip. We charged up to 90% the night before. And then the morning of, I just would go on my phone and tell it charged up to 100%. As you can see, we left around 10:43 in the morning. And when we got back, we plugged in and it basically told us, you've got 30% left and it'll be finished charging by 2 o'clock tomorrow morning. And this is on a relatively slow charging unit. In terms of my charging at home, I've got 2 chargers. One that was put in originally for my Leaf, and one I added recently when we bought the Tesla as well. So we've actually got 2 vehicle chargers in our garage, so we can charge both vehicles at the same time. The ID4 is using a Leaf charger, and it's very slow compared to the Tesla one. But even so, it can still charge it overnight with no trouble. If you want to go on to the binnacle pictures there. So on the left-hand side, I'll talk a little bit about some of the features of the ID4. It has a thing called Travel Assist. So it's very similar to the Tesla Autopilot feature where the car will keep the lane. It will do traffic-aware cruise control. So as you approach a slower vehicle in front, it'll slow down for you. Even though you may have the speed set to 55 or 70, it will slow down for the car in front, in fact, stop if necessary, and then restart motion once the traffic moves. So this picture here was taken on the left here at Trinity Lane. As always with Trinity Lane, it's very slow. You can see we're only doing 26 because that's the speed of the car in front of me. The car at this point is moderating the speed for me. It's also keeping me in my lane. I don't have to worry about how to steer. You may think, well, that's kind of lazy. Why wouldn't you just steer your own vehicle? It's amazing if you use these automated driving systems in these cars. When you arrive at your destination, you feel so much fresher. You're not worn out. The actual act of constantly steering a car takes a bigger strain on you than you possibly realize until you realize the difference of not having to drive all the time. Another nice thing of having that binnacle there, which my Model 3 doesn't have, is that it does provide me the next turn and how far it is and which way to go. So that's kind of handy. And on the right hand side here, we've got just a picture of the car parked out there at my son's house. Because the range of the vehicle is more than adequate, there was no need to go to the trouble of asking my son to move his car so I could plug into the house. So the point is, if you're doing a trip in Tennessee here, as long as you charge up the night before, you're going to get where you want to go, spend all day there, and come back home, just like you would with a gas card. No need to charge. Okay.
All right, JP, is there anything else you wanted to share about your experience?
I'm trying to see my notes. Yeah, I think I've covered all the points I wanted to cover. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, JP, for agreeing to take this trip. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and thank Joe and JP once again for being our speakers today and for taking some of their time out to come and talk to all of us. And now we're going to answer some questions if they're both okay with it, as well as we'll have the Drive Electric Tennessee team here to answer questions that we may not know the answer to. So we've been taking questions in the chat all throughout the presentation. So Madeline Collins has been moderating the chat for us, as well as Daniel. And Madeline, would you want to speak up and share any questions that may have come in the chat first?
Yeah, so we have 2 general questions in the chat. One of them is, will EVs get different mileage in the city versus on the highways? And is it the same as gas or diesel vehicles?
Joe or JP, would either you like to answer?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah. So in fact, if you look at the mileage for city or highway driving, EVs are the opposite of what you would see with a gas car. Around the city, you will get probably more than the rated range for the vehicle, simply because you've got the advantage of regenerative braking as you're driving around the city, and the slower speed means less wind resistance. On the interstate, you get less miles and maybe the rated range. So it's probably the opposite of what you experience with a gas car. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Maddie, what was the next question?
The next question is, are level 2 chargers faster?
Level 2 chargers are going to give you anywhere between maybe 18 miles per hour charge rate to maybe 32 miles per hour charge rate, depending upon the amps and the volts used. They are designed for maybe stopping at a movie theater or shopping at food shopping, malls, things like that, or your home. So level 2 would be a great overnight charge. And so you can figure between 17, 18 miles per hour to about 32. So I get about 30 miles per hour charge rate at my home charger.
Joe, you mentioned that you have two different chargers at home that you use, and that one of them was going to be able to charge more quickly than the other one. Do you think, without getting too technical about it, what's the difference between those two chargers? Why is one faster?
I believe that was
Okay.
JP. That was JP maybe that had the two.
Oh, sorry.
That's
JP.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, Jake?
The charger I use my Tesla, it's a 240 volt unit, the same as, but they're both the same, but it's rated at 32 amps, and the less quick one is rated at 16 amps, which matches what the old Leaf charger's at. So it's just about how much current it will put through. The big advantage of home charging is that if you've got a 240 volt unit, the speed at home that really doesn't matter. You've got so much time while you're sleeping at night. As I demonstrated, the ID4 charged just fine overnight on a 16 amp charge. I don't have to use a 32 amp, though I could. It's just a question of how much money you want to spend for the units. Does
Thanks,
that
JP.
answer your question?
Yeah.
Madeline, was there any other chats and questions in the chat?
There is no more questions in the chat.
Okay, well then we will open it up. If anybody wants to turn on their microphone and ask a question, or I also have some questions I could ask. So I will open it up to the audience first. Would anyone like to speak up and ask a question?
Hi, my name is Jordan. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I was curious about the discussion regarding proprietary charging versus maybe what I guess the other word would be universal charging. And I guess it seems like to me the realistic approach would be to having one type of charger for all cars. And I guess would there be an adapter you would use when you charge from a different charging medium or a different proprietary medium?
Fantastic question.
Well, Tesla's got a proprietary connector, which is nice, but it goes against what you were just commenting on. I wish, like you, that there was one universal standard for both DC as well as AC charging to keep it simple. Tesla does that, but unfortunately it's proprietary. So hopefully there are new standards that are out that simplify the process. They're a little bit bigger, but they're here, and we're moving towards that. And even Apple went away from their USB connector or their iPhone connector. So you can see that we're going to see some changes here in the near future. And if JP wants to add on anything.
For those of you who remember the early days of video cassette recording, you'll remember that there were two standards that first came out. We had VHS, which ended up winning the battle, and then we had Betamax, and the electric vehicle charging infrastructure plug conundrum is in a bit of that situation right now. It's the same thing as when Blu-ray came out. There was also HD DVD, and it took a little while for the market to kind of decide which one they were going to stick with. Now, there's more than just the two options in the electric vehicle charging case, but I imagine as we move, 5 years, 10 years into the future, we will begin to see more standardization between chargers, at least when we're talking about different continents. You may have a different standard established in Europe versus North America, but hopefully we'll see consistent charging standards throughout all of North America at some point soon.
I think it's worth
I
pointing
noticed
out-
you didn't mention 8-track audio tapes, but that's how old I am.
I think it's worth pointing out that the charging plugs you use at your garage at home are the same for all vehicle types. There is just one standard. It's called J1772, and all electric vehicles come equipped to be able to charge there. So you won't have an issue charging at home. It's just when you're on those road trips and you haven't used those rapid chargers where they do have 3 different plugs. In fact, look at my fleet. In fact, I've got all 3 plugs. I've got the ChargerMo plug on my Nissan Leaf. I've got the CCS on my ID4, and I've got the Tesla proprietary on the Tesla. The Tesla, I do have an adapter for ChargerMo, so I can charge at Nissan dealers and other locations where they have the ChargerMo, but I cannot charge at a CCS station on the Tesla. The ID4, I can charge, obviously some CCS, but I can't charge at a ChargerMo station. But I can charge at a Tesla destination station, but not a Tesla Supercharger. I've got an adapter for that. So there are adapters and solutions out there that help overcome this problem. And I think Joe summed up very well in saying it's like cell phones. We've suffered under multiple different connector types for decades on cell phones, and now it's all coming down to USB-C, I think. I think we'll see the same with electric vehicles. I think we'll see CCS becoming the standard in the United States.
And one other thing I wanted to touch on before we move on from this question, because we do have some other great questions both in the chat and we have a hand raised. The other portion of this question that you asked was about adapters. And yes, those are available. Those are something that a lot of EV drivers will keep in their car. It's not necessarily required. It's not something that everybody does, but some people do to kind of widen their options and the ways that they're available to charge. So I've seen a little bit of both. I've seen some people that do and some that don't. But yes, that is something that people do for now while we have this array of charging options.
And I have a little smart 4.2 electric vehicle. It's a commuter car. It goes about 80 miles. It's a little 2-seater smart car. But I have a level 1 charging cord stowed in my trunk. And this was mentioned earlier, but literally anywhere I am, if I can just plug into a regular electrical outlet, 110, 120 volt, I can charge up literally wherever I am that I have access to an electric outlet.
Awesome. So we have, looks like a question in the chat that came in first before we get to the hand raise. So from Mark Spence, the question says, how do you know if a charging station is free or has a cost to charge? For the ones that you have to pay, does it simply have a credit card reader or do you prepay? So Joe or JP, I think you both have had experience with this. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
In the Memphis area, we have several that are commercial, and usually you can use an app called PlugShare, and this PlugShare app is a really good tool. It'll tell you if it's networked and also if it's got any fees associated with it and what those fees are, or what the amount of usually it's time and TVA at this point. TVA does not sell the power, but in the future they'll be selling the power to EV chargers. But everything's time based. So if you connect and you'll see it's based upon how many minutes that you're charging, maybe 2 cents a minute or 3 cents a minute or something like that. And that would be like a Blink or I can't remember the other proprietary networks, but they're available. You can use PlugShare.
Yeah, and so just to delve into that just a little bit deeper. So these charging stations, some of the ones that Joe is talking about, that's like Blink or ChargePoint, those are some of the really big ones that you'll see a lot around. Those often do have, a lot of those have apps associated with them. And so a lot of times you can pay on the app and either in advance or you have your credit card or whatever associated with that. And then when you plug in, you let them know you started. And then when you unplug, then it will charge your card based on how much. So as Joe pointed out, using things like the Plug Share app, as well as when you actually show up to a station, you'll be able to tell if it's free or if there's a cost to charge. A lot of level 2 stations that will be at destinations will be free, whereas a lot of DC fast charge stations are often networked, which means they are associated with an entity and usually they cost in some way. Really depends on the station and what you're going to get. Joe and JP, in your experience, have you ever had a station in public that had a card reader that you actually did, or was it usually on an app?
Yeah, the majority of the ones I've used, either ChargePoint or Blink, there's an RFID card you typically use. The ChargePoint now have gone to use your cell phone. You can just hold it up like an RFID card and use a phone instead of an actual physical card. But you do want you to be a member to be able to charge. Electrify America does accept credit cards. I think they're one of the few networks that gives you the option not to be a member. The advantage of becoming the member with that network is that you'll probably get it cheaper if you use the card that comes with the card charging station versus just paying with a credit card. Like I said, some of it's free, and there's incentives too with VW. The first 3 years of rapid charging is free, unlimited miles, unlimited charging sessions. So it will save quite a bit of money in those first 3 years of ownership.
Yeah, and one other thing, just on the same question, is a lot of these stations will sometimes offer have free charging days or free charging offers on holiday weekends, or when it comes to special day. It's always good to keep up with the station's social media or their newsletters and things like that, the ones that you like, because sometimes they offer it for free, and it's good to take advantage of it on those weekends. Peggy, it looks like you have a question. Would you like to ask it?
I have a question. Is there any plan to put in fast chargers into the rest areas along the expressway?
That's a great question. As far as I know, and this might be a great time for Savannah, our Drive Electric Tennessee coordinator, if she's still on, if she could pop in. To my knowledge, that is not something that's necessarily like in the plan. It's not something that they've announced or that's currently a plan to do. Obviously, that's a great idea and a great point. I'm sure they've thought of that. Currently, one of the main things I know that they're working on is the level 2 stations in state parks around Tennessee, which are going to be a great destination option, as well as Savannah mentioned earlier, the DC fast charger network that they're trying to close those gaps. However, I could see in the future them considering the rest points along the interstate and highways as a good place to install charging stations. But to my knowledge, at this point, there are no plans for that. Savannah, Daniel, anybody else, do you know anything different that I don't?
Yeah, Joe, I don't know if you remember back in January, we were talking about this specifically. So that is a criteria point that we are looking at. When we're looking at prioritizing gaps, that is something, if there's more rest areas or even travel centers, if there's more of those located, then that's more, it's a higher potential for us to fill that gap. So we haven't quite decided that that's going to be a criteria point, but that is something that is taken into consideration because they do offer a lot of the benefits like restrooms, lighting, and all of that a lot of EV drivers are looking for. So, me personally, I would love to see them there, but it's in the works.
Thank you, Savannah. So we've got 2 other questions in the chat, and then I am going to have to stop us after these last 2 questions. So another one from Mark asked, how does the state get the highway taxes that you normally pay when you purchase gasoline? That is another really great question.
We get charged a fee every year. It's a $100 fee to register an EV, since there's no fuel that we buy, gasoline, so there's no gas tax associated with it. So we do this as a one-time fee by year, and it covers the fact that we're not going to usually drive long distances.
And the only other thing to kind of consider in that is, of course, like I said, there is there's the EV tax fee in Tennessee that's $100. However, there are this is different in every state. So if you are not located here in Tennessee, you need to kind of check with your state based on if there is or is not a fee, because this does differ all over the U.S.
And just a quick note about what's happening in Tennessee with that electric vehicle registration fee that's meant to cover some of the lost income for the state in terms of what gets made on the gas tax. There's some discussion in the state legislature right now about increasing that to $150 versus $100 a year. I'm not sure where that will go, but if you are concerned about your tax dollars not going to maintain Tennessee's transportation infrastructure, rest assured the state legislature is thinking about that and thinking about kind of how to recoup that income.
All right, and we have one more question before we finish out for the day. It says, when I pay for charging as I travel, is it more expensive than it would be to charge at home? So I'm sure Joe and JP have some experience with this and can share it with us.
Yeah, typically
Right.
charging at home is the cheapest option, especially since we live in Tennessee. We have advantage of relatively cheap electricity. It varies between 9 and 10 cents a kilowatt hour for me here in the Middle Tennessee area. The rapid charging stations do vary in price quite a bit. Some of them can be actually quite expensive, to be quite honest. But like I said, there's some incentives where you'll actually get free charging for a time period. So the rapid charging, it varies a lot. It can be either very expensive or totally free. But home, it's pretty consistent. I think if you charge at home, that's where your savings come. And when we talk about free charging, it sounds really great. Like you really want that. But I found that charge at home is so cheap that free isn't all that cheap, really. The difference between free and charging at home is actually quite small. The big savings is just plugging at home, which most people do 85–90% of the time. So yes, you may have to pay a little bit extra on that road trip if you don't have some incentive or some cheap way of doing it. The Teslas are probably the fairest priced rapid charging stations. They price it based upon the price of electricity in each region where you go with a small markup. So I hope that answers your question.
Joe and JP, have you ever come across a situation with a pay charger when you're traveling that you've realized is more expensive than the equivalent in gasoline?
Yes, I did. The first long range trip I took in 2014. So pay attention to the amount of amperage on the charger. That's if it's 25 amps versus 30 or 40 amps, obviously that's going to make a difference if time is what is used as a measure of your paying. So if it's slower, then obviously it's going to cost more. So keep an eye on the amperage and the voltage at the charger, and then pay attention to that.
Also, a lot of charging stations will charge you because they charge by time. So if you are sitting there and your car is fully charged and your car is just kind of idling in that spot, still plugged in, a lot of charging stations will charge you for that time. So keep in mind, it's also a common courtesy, move your car when it's finished charging. That's just one little thing to consider. But a lot of people don't, they'll plug in for 20 minutes and then just go. It's not necessarily like they're sitting there all day kind of situation. Unfortunately, it looks like that's going to be all we have time for today. I want to thank everybody for attending, everyone that registered and showed up to hear what we had to say. Thank you again, Joe and JP. You guys are fantastic. We really loved what you had to say. Thank you, Savannah and Daniel and Maddie, for helping me out in this presentation. If you guys want to ever see what else Drive Electric Tennessee is up to, we do have a really fantastic website that I recommend you check out. It's DriveElectricTennessee.org. You can sign up for our email list, follow us on social media. It's just Drive Electric Tennessee everywhere. Please join that Facebook group that I mentioned. A lot of great conversation happens in there. A lot of good questions get asked. A lot of good articles get shared, as well as news. So I really recommend joining there. And then as Drive Electric Tennessee chapters pop up in your area, please consider that as well. If you have any questions following the webinar or anything else, please feel free to reach out to Jonathan Overly, who is the Executive Director of East Tennessee Clean Fuels, or feel free to reach out to me or Daniel or Savannah. It's just all of our names, Savannah, Daniel, Ainsley at etcleanfuels.org. Other than that, have a great rest of your day, and thank you guys for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.